What's going on? What's up? If I snap, my dog will show up. And now here she is, begging for attention. So I can't snap, because if I snap, she just sits here like something's wrong. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? 𝐒𝐥𝐬𝐚𝐥𝐬 here, and we are back. And as you can tell, once again, we are in a different location. My partner and I, unplanned, unexpectedly bought a house, so we had to move on top of all the pandemic restrictions, and there's wildfires here, and there's just been a lot going on. So I haven't had time to shoot, let alone film any content. Now, in my last video, I left you off talking about focus stacking and exposure blending the same image. However, I never actually got into exposure blending. In my defense, I did leave you at a point where you could watch any exposure blending video and figure out how to do it. But I had plenty of you guys ask in the comments, hey, we want to see you do an exposure blending video. So that's this. Let's get started. All right, so you'll notice that I am not where I was sitting before. If you watched my last video, which you can check out here, you notice that there was some lag when I was editing those photos on my laptop, and I just didn't want to go through that again. Those large TIFF files on a 13-inch MacBook just chugged along, especially while I was recording. So we're going to try this out, and I hope it works out. So where I left you off was we had Lightroom open, and we have now created our two stacked images. I have one here and the other one here. So I'm just going to select both of those by holding Control and selecting each of them. Going to edit in and open as layers in Photoshop. Okay, so now that these are open, the first thing I want to do is just make sure that they're aligned. If I zoom in, they're probably pretty spot on, but just in case, I'm going to select both by holding Shift and selecting both of them. You can also hold Control and going to auto align layers. We did this in our last video. I don't think it'll actually change anything. Well, it moved it just a slight bit, but just in case, I want to make absolute sure that they are lined up perfectly, and it looks like they are. Now, to talk about exposure blending, it's actually really simple, and pretty much the first thing you need is an add-on for Photoshop. And what the add-on will do is allow us to select different light values, basically we create black and white images that represent each photo or whatever photo we're working on in terms of its light values. Now, there's plenty of these add-ons out here. I'm going to be using 𝐒𝐥𝐬𝐷. I've also used Rhea Pro, Lumenzia, and I've even done this manually. Realistically, it doesn't matter, and I'll be completely honest, I haven't caught up or kept up with all the tech that goes into the add-ons, so I'm just going to use what I know currently, and either way, all of those add-ons will be able to do exactly what we're doing today. It's the basics of those add-ons, and it's very simple. So let's get started. So typically when I exposure blend, I usually use the darkest image as my base. However, sometimes I will use the light image and then put the background in. The only problem with this photo is that not only do I need to replace all of the background because I don't like how it's exposed, I also think that a lot of the foreground is too bright. So I think this is the layer that I'm going to start with. This is typically how I start, is that I start with the darkest layer and I add the light that I want into the photo. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is just add a vector mask to our base layer, which is our dark layer. And then the next thing we're going to want to do is basically we want to figure out what the first thing is to do the image. And in my opinion, I want to add some light to where there should be light. And in this particular image, I think that there should be light in the snow. That is the most obvious. Maybe not the rocks so much, maybe not the dark ice, but this snow should definitely be brighter than it is. So what we're going to do is come over to our rapid mask, which is a 𝐒𝐥7 panel. And like I said, this will work on any add-on that you get. And we're going to go through, and because we want lights, we're going to select lights. So I'm going to click through here and try to find one that gives us a good selection. Now I can already tell that neither of these selections are good enough. And the reason that is because all the white that you see, the bright white, is basically what we're looking for. We want in our mask, the white sections are what we are trying to select. So when I clicked on lights 1, it did not really give me the snow as a selection. You can tell because all of this area looks pretty gray. So I actually think that's because we're trying to mask our dark layer. So as you can tell, this whole half of the image, the exposure is pretty similar. There is not a lot of contrast or dynamics in this image. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to hide this layer. I'm going to make sure that this mask is deleted so that just in case. We're going to hide this layer and we're actually going to use this image to create our mask. So let's try lights 2. This is much better. Let's try lights 1. Nope, not contrasty enough. This looks good. See the separation between how dark this rock is and how light the snow is? This is exactly what we're looking for. So we're actually going to use this mask for masking our image. Now we can turn our dark layer back on, select it, and we still have the mask selected. Now we're going to come down to here and use our selection tool, which is a 𝐒𝐸7 thing. Now, once you click on this, you're not going to see anything happen. But what actually happens is it goes and selects the mask that it created, but it auto hides what are called your moving ants, if you were. So go back to our layer. I'm just showing you what this is going to do. I'm going to click on this. Now remember, we actually have that selection selected. You just can't see it. We're going to open up a brush. We're going to make it very large. We're going to make sure it is filled with black because our layer is white, and painting in black will reveal below it. And we're going to increase our opacity. For now, we'll do it to 100. And then I'm just going to show you exactly what that mask did. Now, instantly, we have changed what this image looks like. So I'm going to turn my mask on and off. And you can see how much of the spots we've brightened up. But check out the spot below it. It doesn't look like this. It's kept the rock dark, right? It's kept the ice dark like we want it. And that's exactly what the mask is doing. So if I were to delete this mask, unselect what I had selected, and just paint in black, it's just going to bring this back image straight in. But what the mask is doing when we go into here, let me recreate it here. What this mask is doing is it's giving us this selection of luminosity values. And that's what I'm going to try to explain really quick. If you can imagine a gradient from black to white, like this. Each section, so when you're using a luminosity mask add-on, each section is targeting a certain darkness or lightness value, including midtones, but I don't usually use these very often. So when I'm clicking on lights 1, it is highlighting, and I'm just guessing here, my whites that are in this range, for example. And if I clicked on lights 2, it might try to find the whites that are in this range. So what is happening is that when I click on, let's use an extreme example, lights 5. See, it's only showing me the brightest parts of the image. Because remember, this is what the image looks like, and these parts are almost completely blown out, right? So if I'm clicking on lights 5, it's going to show me just the parts that are the brightest, which are the clouds in here. And the same goes for darks 5, right? So remember that it's using white to show you what is selected. And the darkest part of the images are the rocks and the trees. So if I go back in the image, these are the darkest parts of the image. So basically what is happening when you're using a luminosity mask is that each section is selecting out a certain gradient of light. So if I'm trying to target this amount of white, for example, I probably want to select a light 1 or light 2, which is somewhere in this gradient. So again, I use lights 2, and it selected white as here, but it left the dark areas dark. Now remember, if we were to undo that mask, let me delete the 2 masks that it created, and I were to use this image, because there's so little contrast in this part of the image, when I go to lights 2, everything here, or lights 1, let's use that. Everything here is almost the same light value. Obviously the rock is a little bit darker, but you have very little separation between the snow and the ice. And that means that when we're selecting it, it's selecting everything in this region, which is basically gray. So if I were to try to use this mask to mask my image, it's not going to work because there's just not enough separation between the snow and the ice, or the snow and the rocks, which is why we decided to use the brighter image to create our mask. And I hope that kind of explains what masking does. So I'm going to get us back to where we were. So this is our mask. I'm going to turn this back on. I'm going to make our selection based off our mask, which again is just selecting this and auto hiding the marching ants. So to go back in, make our selection, and paint our light back in. Now that was really easy. And as you can tell, super powerful, because if I wanted to not take very long to edit this photo, I could have just done that and maybe add some light into the rocks and be done, and that'd be it. Obviously there's a lot more fine tuning and a lot more artistic expression based off what you want to do. So what I would actually probably do is, because I want to brighten the whole part of the image, I'm just going to bring my opacity of my brush down a little bit to about 40. And I'm going to paint in exactly how I did before. And then I'm going to paint in a little bit around the spots that I think should be brighter, because obviously there is light right here reflecting. So I think this spot should be just a little bit brighter. Now what I'm going to do is get more technical. I'm going to decrease my brush size, decrease my opacity, and zoom in just a little bit and start painting in some of the spots that are around my focal point, which in my opinion is this rock. And again, this is where your artistic expression really comes out, and you get to decide what you want to look as the focus or the brightest part of the image, or to what really stands out. The key is making sure that things don't look too out of the ordinary. You don't want them to pop out too much. So let's check out what our mask has done in this image so far. Okay, so this might not be perfect, or where I would leave it if I was sitting here and being monotonous, but for the sake of the video, I'm going to continue on. Now, the next thing you might notice is that the rocks really have no detail in them. So I think what I want to do is take the rocks, and we're going to luminosity mask those, but instead of using the light side, we're going to just use the dark side.
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
And it's that simple. And then we'll only have the rocks selected, so we can bring out the rocks from the other image into our main image. So let's do that. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to hide this layer again, because remember that this image, our bottom image, has more dynamics between the rocks and the light parts of the image, so I want to use that as my mask. I'm going to try darks 1. Okay, remember that when it's showing you this black and white version, white is the selection, but I don't really want the snow to be gray at all. I want it to be almost black. So let's try another one. Nope, still not quite there. Okay, this is perfect. See how much separation is there between the rock and the snow in our selection. So remember that white selects the darkest parts. That's what we want. And black is the parts that will not be selected, which is great because we don't want to add more light to our snow. So this mask should be perfect. I'm going to click my selection tool. I'm going to turn this layer back on, and I'm going to open up the brush tool again, and I'm just going to increase my opacity to about 40 again and just see what happens. Okay, so that added a subtle amount of light, as you can see right here, but it added a little bit more light than I wanted to the ice. So what I'm going to do is undo, and I'm going to decrease my opacity to about 15%. And then what I'm going to do is just kind of paint over the whole image really quick. And let's see what that did. It's very subtle, but it added just a little bit of light to the spots that I think to the whole image. Now, let's target just the rocks. So we're going to increase our opacity to about 25%. We're going to go in, and remember, it's not going to affect the snow. So I can paint on here as much as I want and you can see that the light values of the snow are not changing. But I want to increase this rock a little bit. We can go around and increase this rock a little bit and that rock. And now I would be more precise if I was editing this for my portfolio. But for the sake of the video, I'm just going to go through and gently just increase the rocks. Now, you see I'm not worrying too much about the size of my brush, but I am affecting some spots that I might not want to affect. And again, if I was spending more time, I might come in here and really paint in some light. Now, the other things you want to pay attention to are, where is there light already on the rocks? Because you want to use your image as a basis for what is natural. So you don't want to just paint a bunch of light in that might not have actually been there. You want to think, how would the light reflecting on the back of this mountain actually affect these rocks in the image? So what we can do is go through and say, okay, it looks like there's some light here already. So let's bring that out a little bit more, or right here. And there might be some right there. And you can just go through and you can notice that this side is dark, but this side naturally has a little bit of light on it. And you can add in just a little bit. And the key is you want to keep it simple. You don't want to overdo it. You don't want to be at 100%. You want to just add very light amounts. And you want to always, for me, my rule of thumb is, okay, I did it and now let me cut it in half. Like, instead of 30%, let me use 15%. So that's typically what I do. So let's go back. This might be a little bit too bright. And again, this is our main focused rock. So let's work on that one just a little bit. And you can see I'm highlighting these top parts because those would be the spots that would likely have light on them naturally rather than these dark spots behind. And I'm just switching between white and black to remove and add in light. Now let's just see what that looks like with and without the mask. See how much more contrast we've added into the image just by doing 2 luminosity masks and blending in our layer from behind. Okay, so now that you know how to use luminosity masks and exposure blend, I'm gonna just show you one other thing that I did on this particular image using those techniques, but not using the photos. I just kind of wanted to add a little bit more color into the image. So if you pay attention, something that I noticed about this image is that the mountains are colored in golden light, but the foreground is very blue. And to me, that's just not necessarily natural or what I would think would happen. I would expect some of this light to reflect back, and it does just a little bit, but it's so subtle that you can't really tell. So what I want to do is I want to add some color into the bottom part of this image to kind of just make it pop just a little bit more, but it'll be quite subtle. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new layer. We are going to open up our foreground color. And as you can tell, I've already done this. I want to sample some of this golden snow right here. And I'm going to pick a slightly darker and more saturated color over here because I don't want to brighten stuff up too much. And now that I have my color sampled, I want to fill this layer with my foreground by pressing Shift F5, or you can just use your paint bucket tool. So I have now filled my layer with the foreground color. The first thing I'm going to do is go over here and change my blending mode on the layer to soft light. What that is going to do is only affect the regions that we really want to affect. Even though we're going to paint all of this stuff in, it just will add a slightly more subtle effect and won't affect some of the spots that we don't want to, which is the darker areas. So now that that's done, I'm going to go down here with our layer selected, and we want to create a vector mask filled with black. And to do that, instead of just clicking on Add Layer Mask, we're going to hold Alt or Option on a Mac and click, and it will add a layer mask that is black. So now that we have our layer mask added, I'm going to go back in and create my luminosity mask like I did before, and let's just do the snow again. So I'm going to use our light layer, create a light mask, turn these layers back on, select my selection of the mask, go into the layer that I want to paint on, open up a paintbrush, and I'm just going to subtly, maybe 10%. Now I might do this a little bit less, but it's going to be hard to tell because of YouTube. I'm going to paint with white to reveal the layer, and I'm just going to do a big sweeping motion like that. And I'm going to add in just a little bit more so you guys can see it, but I probably would not do this normally. Now, really quick, you can tell there's just a slight glow now between the snow and the ice. And it's a very subtle addition, but I think it really helps in the image. So now that I've added in that color to basically the whole bottom half of the image in a very subtle way, we can do exactly what we did before. We can come in here and we can paint in just a little bit more color into the spots we want to accentuate, because those would naturally have more color reflecting in them, right? So we're just going to paint in here. And really quick, you can see what just a little bit of color will add in to the image. It makes it where it's not so dull at the bottom part, and it does mimic and reflect the light that is happening on the mountains. So that's pretty much it. That's another technique you can use to use the exposure blending / luminosity mask to help enhance your image. And really quick, to bring that home, I'm going to show you the image that I did originally right here. And you can tell I have my 2 layers that I blended together, and I actually have 4 different colors added in, and it's all the same color. The layer is just duplicated, but I just wanted to show you how I just subtly added in this layer, added in just a little bit of light and color to the snow. This layer is just a tiny bit more, and then this layer is just a tiny bit more. Now, I didn't have to create 3 layers to do this. I could have simply just continued to paint in. But typically, if I want to remove something or remove an amount, it's easier for me to just add a layer and paint in the spots that I want again, rather than just trying to do it all in one layer. And then the last thing I did was I noticed that the rocks did not have enough of that golden light on them as well. So I just added just a touch, just right at the tops here. You can tell it's very subtle. And it also, I added some into the dark spots of the ice. And some final things I did were I added a slight curves adjustment into the image to just brighten up some of those spots that should be just a little bit lighter. And I just masked it out using luminosity mask, just like we did before, except I applied it to a curves layer rather than a photo or a color layer or anything like that. And the final step I took was removing some debris from the snow. And then also I shifted the rock just ever so slightly to be more center of the image, so that when I crop it down, I don't have to crop so much off the image. Remember, just be subtle. Don't overdo things. Make things look natural. All right, so that's pretty much it. You watched us take 2 images, blend them together using luminosity masks, and we even use some techniques like adding color into the image using luminosity masks and curves adjustments and stuff like that. Something else I was going to suggest is, you notice the whole time I was not using a Wacom tablet or pressurized pen. And that's because I kind of wanted to make the video a little bit more accessible to everyone. I just adjusted the opacity of my brushes every time I wanted to make an adjustment, but I do use them, and they are a great tool specifically for this, because what it allows you to do, it will allow you to determine how much of that light gets painted in based off of how much pressure you're putting on the pad, rather than having to go through, make your opacity 10% and add a little bit in, and then make your opacity 8% and add a little bit in. You can do it all in one motion, and it just saves you a lot of time, but it also creates just more of a natural gradient between lights and darks where they should be. So I highly recommend you getting one of those, and this is the final image we ended up with. All right, so that's pretty much it. You guys have now exposure blended your first image, or maybe not your first image. But as you can tell, it's not as complicated as it sounds. And what's really cool is that you can use just those techniques of using the luminosity mask to select light and add effects to them. You can blend layers together like we did. You can add color like we did. You can add effects like curves or levels or saturation adjustments to only specific parts of an image using those luminosity masks. And honestly, you can sit there for hours doing that and playing around. And that's kind of the beauty of editing landscape photography, is that you have that freedom, you have that artistic expression. It's up to you to do what you want to do. Now, the challenge comes from deciding, what do I need to do? A lot of times, especially when you're starting out or just editing your first image, you're like, what does this need? And you really haven't developed, a path to take, like, okay, this needs to be more saturated or less saturated or sharper or brighter or darker or anything like that. So I tried to show you what I did in this image, which is, okay, I had my base image and I said, okay, the snow should definitely be brighter based off of how bright the sky is, right? So we added some brightness in, and then I said, okay, why isn't the bottom part of the image a little bit more colorful, reflecting the top part of the image? So we add a little bit of color there. And those are the kind of things that you might struggle with. I still struggle with today. Sometimes I have to take walks. Sometimes I have to sleep on it. Sometimes I'll edit an image and I won't look at it again for like a week. So those are the things you're gonna have to go through and process. What I would do is look at other people's images, people that you admire, say, what does this image look like and what did it probably look like when they took it? And then say, okay, I want my image to somewhat look like that. So I need to add some color, add some more contrast. Those are the kind of things you'll figure out as you go. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was easy to understand, and I will see you guys again next time, and hopefully it won't be as long in between. Thanks for watching. Peace.